Welcome to this lecture, which is Introduction to Poetry. I think that your textbook does a really good job of giving you a background into the semantics of poetry, what you can expect to find in a poem, the elements that create a poem. What I wanted to talk about, though, was sort of your attitude as you approach a poem and what your steps should be in trying to navigate your way through our unit on poetry. I think it can be really daunting for students to approach poetry. A lot of times you feel like you don't have the right, and I put that in air quotes, the right ideas about it. You don't understand it, or you're having trouble knowing what the author's trying to say because the author was born 300 years before you were. All of this, I think, is perfectly normal, and I don't want that to stop you from experiencing a poem. Yes, there are certain things that you have to identify in an older poem in order to understand what's going on, but I think that's part of the experience. And so I don't want you to feel like because you're coming at it in 2013 that you don't have the capacity to understand it the same way someone did in, say, Shakespeare's time. In fact, I think everyone's universal human experience makes it a joy to read poetry, and I want you to find that joy. It can be really challenging, especially in an online class where you don't get the chance to come to a classroom and talk about the poem and sort of get some illumination from the teacher about what each poem is about. But please remember that this isn't a poetry class, this is a writing class. And so I want you to use poetry as a vehicle to write. And so you don't have to have the perfect ideas, and you don't even have to have the right ideas, honestly. The content of what you are writing, to me, is not as important as the structure and the clarity with which you write it. That's not to say that I want you to not try. I really do, and I'm going to question you, and I'm going to ask you to think hard about poems, and I'm going to ask you to do complicated things with writing. I'm doing that because, number one, I know you can do it, and number two, I think thinking this way and asking yourself questions can only benefit you as you continue. Now, you may be thinking, no, that's not possible. I'm never going to have to take another poetry class. Asking questions about literature doesn't only happen in poetry class. Asking questions about literature teaches you how to ask questions, and asking questions is a fundamental part of any kind of scholastic endeavor. So I think that you're going to find that asking questions and learning how to communicate what you have decided about those questions is going to ultimately benefit you anywhere you go. All of that to say that I'm going to start out by having you listen to an author read his own poem, a poem called Introduction to Poetry. This is in your book, so if you want to turn to it in your Seagull reader, it's in there. I think it's in the page 70 something, but I don't want to hold up the lecture by looking for it. I think you can just experience it by listening to it as well. He's talking about poetry from a teacher's perspective, which he says, and I want you to think about the images that he uses and the things that he's asking of his students, because I feel the same way. So let's listen to Billy Collins.
And this poem is about teaching poetry, and it's called Introduction to Poetry. And when I refer to them in the beginning of the poem, I mean my students. Introduction to Poetry. I ask them to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say, drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out, or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means.
So I really like that poem because I think it sort of encapsulates the way teachers feel. We're not asking you to find the only meaning. We're not asking you to find the single universal key to all mythology, so to speak. We're asking you to just experience the poem. And this poem about experiencing poetry shows that by giving you a series of images, dropping a mouse into it and watching it wander its way out, or fumbling along a wall for a light switch, holding it up like a color slide, or water skiing across it. All of these are images that sort of encapsulate or try to communicate the sensory experience that poetry should be. So as you're getting started in this unit, what I'm going to ask you to do, in addition to reading the introduction, which again I think does a really fine job, I just want you to remember a few things. The first is that poetry was meant almost always to be read out loud. So I would encourage you, if you're struggling, even if it makes you feel a little dumb, to read it out loud. Try to get the cadence of it. Try to hear it. Try to feel it. Try to use your senses as you're experiencing poetry. I think that will help you to sort of capture the tone and the feeling of the poem. Your book talks about a series of steps that you should go through as you're trying to understand and write about a poem, and I just want to briefly go over those. The first is to understand the speaker, the audience, and the rhetorical situation. What does that mean? A lot of students mistakenly believe that the speaker of the poem is the author of the poem. In the case of Billy Collins's poem, it actually is, because he is the teacher to whom he's referring. But I think that that's actually the exception rather than the rule. A lot of times the speaker of a poem is going to be the created character that an author has constructed to communicate whatever it is that he or she is trying to communicate. So I think you make an error when you think that it's just the author as speaker. So your first step is to identify who the speaker is, and then who is that speaker talking to. That's going to help you already identify what the poem may be about or be focused on. And then the rhetorical situation, sort of the context, what's happening in the world that this author has constructed that is going to sort of, inform the poem or help you to understand what is influencing the speaker. The second step is to figure out the literal meaning of the language. So actually knowing what all the words mean, knowing what the speaker is actually saying concretely is going to help you to then move on to the third step, which is the figurative meaning. So this is where a lot of students get hung up and they think, I don't know what the meaning is. I want you to just think about what is the meaning of the poem as. What do you as the reader think the author is trying to get you to feel or to believe or to do? What is the author trying to communicate with you? I think if you can answer that question, then you're coming close to answering the question of meaning. A lot of students think that because it's poetry, it can have any infinite number of meanings. I suppose that can be true. However, it doesn't just mean whatever you want it to mean because you want it to mean that. You have to have some evidence from the poem to support that. So if you're reading a sonnet by Shakespeare and you're suggesting that he's talking about the eternal nature of love, I'm going to probably be with you on that. You're probably right. But I don't think that's the only answer. I think you can probably come up with other things that he's probably trying to say. But you probably can't say that he's talking about the eternal nature of technology, or that he's talking about how he hates his mother, or he's talking about how poetry is stupid, okay? Because you're not going to have any evidence for that in the poem. So just like any argument you're making, when you're asserting the meaning of something, you have to have evidence to back it up. So when you get to that third step in the poetry of figuring out the figurative meaning of the poem, you want to look back at the poem. What does the sum total of the poem say to you? What does it tell you? What is it giving you? And that's going to be the answer to that question that I posed earlier. What is the author trying to get the reader to feel or to believe, to come away with an attitude about the world? That's going to be your answer about meaning. I hope this has helped a little bit, just to sort of give you some confidence as a reader. You are a reader, even if you don't feel like a good reader and you don't feel like a good English student and all these things that I often hear from students. You are equipped to read, understand, and write about poetry. My goal is to give you the tools to do that. And this is meant to give you the confidence to go into this unit with a little bit of spring in your step, so to speak. knowing that you can come up with good answers, and to know that I care about what you think. I don't care about what someone on the internet thinks or what, SparkNotes thinks. I care about what you think. I want to hear what you think about the poetry that you're reading. Have confidence in your ideas and read and try to experience the poetry as the poet intended for you to, and try to just relax a little bit about it and sort of feel your way through it. And I think that you'll be much happier than if you try to beat a confession out of it. All right, let me know if you have questions. Otherwise, enjoy the poems that we're going to read.